three key geographical regions of first-century Palestine were Galilee, Samaria, and Judea. By the time of Jesus' ministry, Samaritans and Judeans had experienced 700 years of tense and hostile relationships, even while acknowledging Jacob as their common patriarch. We get a glimpse of this messiness in this Sunday's Gospel. Luke chapter 9, verses 51 through 62. When the days for Jesus being taken up were fulfilled, he resolutely determined to journey to Jerusalem, and he sent messengers ahead of him. On the way, they entered a Samaritan village to prepare for his reception there, but they would not welcome him, because the destination of his journey was Jerusalem. When the disciples James and John saw this, they asked, "Lord, do you want us to call down fire from sky vault to consume them?" Jesus turned and rebuked them, and they journeyed to another village. As they were proceeding on their journey, someone said to him, "I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus answered him, "Foxes have dens and birds of the sky vault have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to rest his head." And to another he said, "Follow me." But he replied,
"Lord, let me first go and bury my father."
But he answered him, "Let the dead bury their dead, but you go and proclaim the kingdom of God." And another said,
"I will follow you, Lord, but first let me say farewell to my family at home."
To him Jesus said, "No one who sets a hand to the plow and looks to what was left behind is fit for the kingdom of God." In this passage, the Samaritans do not show Jesus hospitality because Jesus intended only to pass through Samaria but not hold up there. His face was set toward Jerusalem. He determined resolutely to travel to Jerusalem. Of course, the Samaritans perceive this as a slight, while James and John view such a refusal to provide hospitality as insulting. When Samaritans refused hospitality to Jesus' advanced men, his disciples, quite typically for agonistic Middle Eastern culture, did not hesitate to wish destruction upon them, killing them all with fire from the sky, as Elijah did. What prompted this traditional mutual enmity between Judeans and Samaritans? Consider the Assyrian invasion in 721 BCE. Sargon the Assyrian defeated the northern kingdom Israel around 721 BC, deported most of the native population, and resettled aliens in their place in Samaria. These intermarried with the remaining natives, prompting the Judeans to label the Samaritans as impure people, half-breeds. Judeans would have nothing to do with Samaritans. Next, consider the Babylonian exile, 587 to 537 BCE. When the Judeans returned from their exile in 537 BCE under Persian rule, their antipathy toward the Samaritans prompted an outright rejection of the Samaritan offer to collaborate in rebuilding the Jerusalem temple. After the death of Alexander of Macedon in 323 BCE, a group of Samaritans, disenfranchised by the Hellenic rulers, rebuilt Samaria and its ancient city, Shechem. This same group eventually built a Samaritan temple to Yahweh on Mount Gerizim. Hostilities and disagreements about proper worship dot the centuries-long history of relationships between the Judeans and Samaritans. In the 1st century BCE, Pompey rebuilt Samaria, and Herod the Great, the Idumean hated by the Judeans he ruled, built a city in Samaria that included a temple to Caesar Augustus. He called the city Sebast, the honorific Greek title of Roman emperors. Understandably, the Samaritans in this period enjoyed Roman favor and protection, while the Judeans were less fortunate. Then two events brought their mutual tensions to a peak. First, during Passover time, sometime between 6 and 9 Common Era, some Samaritans snuck into the Jerusalem temple and strew bones throughout. Since coming into contact with a corpse made the pilgrims unclean, this sacrilege disrupted the Passover observance for that year. How do you think the Judeans reacted to that? The second event is in 51 Common Era. Samaritans in the village of Gemma murdered a Judean Passover pilgrim en route to Jerusalem. Judeans retaliated by massacring the entire village and burning it to the ground. The Roman governor Cumanus avenged the Samaritans by punishing the Judeans, who, in turn, persuaded the Syrian governor Quadratus to punish the Samaritans and banish Cumanus. These two events constitute the immediate background for understanding Judean hostility to the Samaritans in the New Testament, and it also demonstrates the heroic attempt to diffuse it by the anonymous author we call Luke. We need to distinguish Luke's Jesus from Matthew's Jesus. The Matthean Jesus has no use for Gentiles and Samaritans. While the Matthean Jesus commands his disciples to enter no town of the Samaritans, Lucan Jesus rebukes these same disciples who would call down fire from sky vault, obliterating the inhospitable Samaritans. The Lucan Jesus rejects this eye for eye, tooth for tooth mentality. Further, the author we call Luke creates and inserts a good Samaritan into a story whose traditional cultural progression required a Judean layperson as the third character, after the priest and the Levite. Oh, but Luke puts in a Samaritan. In addition, the Lucan Jesus exhibits special sensitivity to the Samaritan leper among the 10 cleansed, by omitting the recommendation of offering the prescribed sacrifice, as in Matthew chapter 8, verse 2. The Samaritan gift, of course, would not be welcome in the Jerusalem temple. Finally, in Acts chapter 8, verses 5 through 8, and verses 14 through 17, the same author we call Luke adopts a clever strategy to persuade alienated kin, Samaritans and Judeans, to be reconciled. In Luke's storyline, the Samaritans believe the word preached by the Hellenist Philip, but receive the Spirit from the Judeans Peter and John. If you really look at that closely, you see that doesn't make sense. If you get baptized, you get the Spirit. What is this getting baptized but not receiving the Spirit till Peter and John come along? This artificial separation of the Spirit from baptism is Luke's intentional strategy for stirring Samaritan respect for and loyalty to Jerusalem and Judeans. It also aims at improving understanding between Samaritans and Judeans. For contemporary American believers, this thumbnail sketch of historical relationships between Judeans and Samaritans, and Luke's masterful efforts at reconciliation, poses this challenge. Should we allow cultural and historical differences to divide us on Sunday? Is there only one way to serve God? Is there only one way to love Jesus? Is there only one way to be Christian? Who or what can help us appreciate the integral and rightful place in the Christian community of those culturally different from us?